Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and welcome to this episode of Cracking Addiction. And today we're going to speak with Dr. Laura Petracek and her journey in recovery. So, Laura, I believe that today is a particularly significant milestone for you.
Yes, it is, Fergal. It's my 47th year clean and sober.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, how did you do it? This is the thing. If we could bottle what you did and what you continue to do on a daily basis, that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yes, I would be, I think. I agree. I
So,
think
tell me your
everyone's
secret.
journey, well, I don't necessarily think I have a secret. Everyone's journey is different. Um, I think a big part in the beginning, what helped me is that my best friend at the time, our sobriety dates were a week apart. So it's like I had a buddy in recovery. Sometimes now in the rooms I hear, oh, so and so and I are litter mates, meaning they came into the rooms at the same time. So I had a litter mate, as it were. And
All
that
right.
was really helpful to be not just accountable, like not just having a home group, but having one specific person as a go to person.
So what I'm hearing then, it was a meaningful connection with a non-drug using peer who was as committed to abstinence as you were and was able to walk with you in your journey, share a journey.
Exactly. Yeah.
So can we go back 47 years ago and to the time when you first of all realized that there was a problem? Take us through that, through what was happening back then.
Well, I'm going to take you back just a little bit more because
All
I
right.
first came into recovery when I was 17. I started drinking young. I come from an alcoholic family, started doing drugs. And by the time I was 17, I was drinking like a case of beer a day, smoking pot all day, doing speed. I was just getting high all the time, smoking pot. And I was suffering from severe depression. And at one point, my I was crying every morning at the breakfast table. Mom said, I don't know what's wrong. I said, I don't know. I need help. So she took me to a psychiatrist who put me on, I'm not sure what kind of antidepressant. But unfortunately, it is what they have a warning label now for adolescents that take antidepressants that it can make you feel a little bit better, but a little bit better so you have energy to actually commit suicide. And so uh, one evening, I took a bunch of sleeping pills from my parents and then all my pills, and I laid them out one by one. I probably took over 200 sleeping pills, and I blacked out. I really don't remember what happened. My dad said, "Oh, she's high. I put her to bed." But my mom, she said, "No, something's wrong." She looked all through my room, found the empty bottles, called the ambulance. I coded in the ambulance. I was dead on arrival. I was in a coma for a week, and it was really touch and go. And
Mm.
when I woke up, I honestly was not happy to be alive because I thought, not this shit again. Like, I didn't know, I had no tools for living. And I thought, I cannot go back to how I was living. I'll never make it. And so they had a woman, kind of fast forward, I was in adolescent psych unit. They had a woman from AA come to talk to me. And she said, "Well, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're alcoholic." And I said, "Really?" I said, "I'm 17. I can't be alcoholic." She goes, "Yeah, I think so." I was like, okay. You know, I didn't have a lot of resistance because,
Mm.
again, the situation that I would be going back to was a worse situation, at least in my mind. But then we had the issue of, so my parents weren't really on board with treatment. They wanted me to go to a Catholic high school or do something else. So this woman helped me go through the emancipation process. And then I was able to sign myself into treatment. And I was there for 9 months. And it was the best 9 months of my life. It was the first time I knew what a family was, being happy. learning how to live without drinking or drugs. Um, Eventually,
Why
my
was it
parents,
happy?
because people were loving and caring. Um, I'm gonna start crying, but
That's
just to
all
be
right.
seen, I come from a family of 10 people, so I was very much invisible. Um,
Mm,
and really, you know, trying to commit suicide was probably the first time I really felt seen. Sad as that sounds, there is.
mm.
There was just a lot of chaos with, you know, parents drinking, my brother dealing drugs out of the basement. It was just pretty much a shit show. And how I survived was school. I just dug into school. I'd go to the library. At one point in California, the schools were so crowded they had double session. And I begged my parents so I could go to school to both of them, meaning 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I wouldn't have to be home. And yeah, school saved me for sure. Um,
But school saved you from what? That's what I want to know.
from the despair, from the chaos, I was really bullied a lot at home and at school, but at least if I was in the library, no one really bullied me. But at home, there was no safe place. I had five brothers. They were pretty much, one in particular was very sadistic. And my parents never intervened. And I think they were overwhelmed and in their own alcohol use stuff. So I really didn't want to be there. It wasn't safe. Um, so that's why I didn't want to be home. Um, yeah, they'd say really mean things like, so the thing was, my brother would steal my food. He'd say I'd eaten. He'd call me names like Porky the Pig. At school, they called me Skelly because I was so rail thin and starving. And then the school nurse said, I don't know. I think you might have leukemia. I'm going to call your parents in. And that's, I mean, when I came into rehab, I was probably 90 pounds soaking wet, and I was 5'6". Um, so yeah, I remember early into rehab, it'd be 5 o'clock, and time to have dinner, and I didn't even have breakfast or lunch. I just learned how to not be hungry. My parents would lock the freezer because there are so many of us, and I learned how to set the alarm at 2 and go in the freezer. And to this day, frozen food is still a delicacy. How sad is that? But it is, because that's when I could get food. Um, so it was not a good situation. Yeah, and then I started going to meetings. When I was going to leave rehab, and so I moved out with some other folks. I went to get my alcoholism certificate at a community college. I was working full time. And then at about 11 months sobriety, I thought, well, I'm going to go do some more research. I don't really think I'm alcoholic. So I did do more research. And it wasn't like the first time, meaning I wasn't loaded, or high morning, noon, and night, but I tried controlled drinking, which didn't go too well, but I gave it my best shot. And I can't tell you exactly what the incident was before I uh, got sober on September 7th, 1976. But it was, I was with my godparents, and I don't know, something bad happened. They were even too embarrassed to tell me. So I thought, okay, I don't even know. I don't even want to know, but I know where I need to go back to. And I went back to AA.
So I mean, first of all, I want to thank you for your bravery in sharing this story. It's heartbreaking, but unfortunately, it's not atypical for people who find themselves affected with substance use disorders. And everyone has a kind of a starting point with alcohol and a tipping point with alcohol. What was your starting point with alcohol? When did you first realize that alcohol could be your friend for a short time at least?
Yeah. I would say probably seventh grade. My friends and I would go in my parents' liquor cabinet and, we drink so much and then fill it with water and try to not have it be noticed. And then, uh, my brothers were older and they could get alcohol, so they would get us alcohol. And, but yeah, I didn't really feel the tipping point probably until eighth grade, I think, when I got drunk. So just drinking a beer didn't do a lot for me, but I love being totally just out. I started blacking out when I was in ninth grade. I
What?
mean,
Why did it? Why was it so attractive for you?
because it took away the pain
Yeah,
that I was living in. I was already suicidal in seventh grade. And so it took that pain all away. It took it away. And it also was a good social lubricant. I was very shy. I still am. And so, but it really helped me make connections with other kids, and getting higher drinking with other kids was like the fast track to social life as a teenager.
yeah. May I ask why? Why were you feeling suicidal in high school?
Again, I think I told you some of the family background.
Hmm.
And and then also I started struggling with my sexuality in high school.
Hmm.
I thought I might be gay, and like I didn't want to be gay. Everyone hated gay people. I hated gay people, and especially being raised Catholic. Like, forget it. I'm going to go to hell. So that was another reason I was suicidal. I just didn't want to be who I was. I didn't want to be who I was, even separate from struggling with my sexual identity. All the other girls were cuter, had more personality. You know, got along easier with people. Like I said, in my family is very isolated. The room they put me, or not put me in, but the room I was in used to be a porch, and then they made it into a room. And this was in Minnesota. It was fucking freezing in this thing, and then I was separated from the house. So I mean, I already felt like I don't belong at home. I don't belong in school. I don't belong anywhere. So what am I doing here? It was just very, very painful, and that feeling of belonging is still a big struggle.
There's two key kind of thought processes that I worry about when I chat to people who are feeling the way you felt, and feeling as if you're a burden or feeling as if you don't belong are really, for me, red flags. So
Yeah, don't belong.
you didn't belong.
No.
So you felt utterly alone in a world surrounded by strangers who were judging you.
Well, they didn't even know what was going on for me. I was surrounded by strangers, sadly enough. My own family were strangers. The kids were strangers. I mean, these are supposed to be my friends, but when I was in the psych ward, they broke into my room and stole all my drugs and alcohol. Those were my friends.
Your journey into alcohol started with basically the freedom from social anxiety and also the quest for oblivion to take away your pain,
Yeah, and major
right?
depression.
And major depression.
Yeah.
Now, and that was what year? What year? That was seventh grade, you said?
71, or 71, I was in ninth grade. So like 68, 69.
And then you talk about this desire to suddenly come clean and stop drinking alcohol. Let's go back over that particular event. Was there a tipping point, or was it a gradual realization?
Yeah, no, you mean that I went back out?
Yeah,
Is that what you mean? Yeah, I actually was really struggling at that time with my sexuality. And so when I was drinking, I could have sex with men and then it was fine. But if I was
yeah.
sober, it didn't go so well. So that was a
Mm.
big tipping point. It was easier to be straight when I was drinking.
Then you had your overdose, and then you went to the supportive environment. That 9 months, and you were the happiest in the world, you said.
Yeah. it was so great. Like I never knew what a family could be like. Like people say, good morning. And people say, I love you. I care about you. Like the first time I experienced a hug was in rehab and I just
Yeah,
start, I couldn't stop sobbing. I never
yeah,
had physical
yeah.
connection. Yeah.
So
So,
your inflection point into abstinence was basically the suicide attempt and being reached out to by someone from AA, who then
yes,
introduced you to this into this supportive
exactly.
environment. Yeah, and there you felt as if you belonged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we've got this theme of social connection.
Right. And not just belonging, but people who cared and see me, you
Yeah.
know, like I finished school in rehab and, I finished like a year and a half early and they were like, well, I said, oh, can I just start college? They're like, well, no, you can't. But so it was hard because school became my drug of choice. And I really missed not doing it just for the short periods of time. But anyway, yeah. The rehab was great. My parents did come eventually to family group. And then my counselor told me that my mom was drunk like a couple times. And then I don't think they came anymore after that.
Moving forward, you kind of dabbled with controlled drinking a little bit. Now we've talked in other episodes about how, at least I've expressed to you how I feel that people who have an alcohol use disorder, when they start thinking about controlled drinking, well, that's actually a cognitive distortion. Would you be happy to talk about your thought processes around controlled drinking when you were trying it?
So, a couple things. When I was in school to be an alcoholism counselor, we had to write a paper on our theory of alcoholism or chemical dependency. And so I wrote a thesis on chemical independency, meaning I'm not dependent on chemicals. And so the professor gave me an A. He thought it was, I did a lot of good research. So it was well researched. But here's the thing what happened for me about controlled drinking. So, like you and I are talking now, but let's say I decided on Friday I'm going to have 2 drinks at 6. That's all I would be thinking about. I wouldn't hear a word you're saying, Fergal. I would just be thinking in my head, obsessing, I can't wait till Friday at 6 o'clock. So I
Yeah,
missed whole conversations at times because I
yeah,
was obsessing about what I could drink. And then most of the time, it wasn't just 2 drinks, it was 20. I mean, my capacity to consume alcohol was just unbelievable. I just couldn't believe it, but I could, because I did. I'd have drinking games with guys, and I'd always drink anyone under the table, any guy under the table, and I was actually
yeah,
proud of it. And they were like, "How do you do
yeah.
that?" But um, but yeah, it didn't. It didn't do well. Here's another uh, really negative consequence is that I didn't have enough money because I was spending so much money on drinking and doing drugs again. So I moved back home after not being home for 3 years. That
Right.
was not a good place for me. So getting sober, I moved back out. And yeah,
So you moved back home when you were in the phase of thinking you could do controlled drinking. Is that right?
yeah.
Right. So what was the thinking behind that? Why did you think moving back home would be a good idea?
Well, I knew it wasn't, but I didn't have enough money to support myself. And nowadays parents give their kids money like water. But, back then, you know, if I could get a dime from them, I was lucky. So it didn't happen like
Mm,
that. I needed,
right.
one of my roommates moved out. I asked for money to cover for the rent. Yeah, sorry about your luck. And so I moved back. And then it was just comfortable in a sense of because most everyone drank. So I could just, then no one was going to say anything about my drinking. But I could tell I was going downhill fast, and I was like, I know I need to get back to AA.
So you were effectively you'd relapsed. You were back in an environment that was enabling your alcohol use. So
Oh, for
you're back
sure.
to
Huge
yeah,
enabler. Huge
yeah.
enabler. Yeah.
So where had the controlled drinking gone at this stage? Was that
Where has the cold drinking gone?
had that gone down the toilet?
It went way far away. It was an
Okay.
experiment. I was just talking with a client earlier today about her. I said I call them little science experiments. Like she was trying to do these little cans of alcohol instead of a bottle of wine, and she said, "Laura, all of a sudden I realized I was drinking like I had 16 of those cans, which is three times more than a bottle of wine." So yeah, I realized my science experiments were not working, and I
Yeah.
couldn't right. And I knew it. I knew it, and I liked my life better sober, even though I didn't like feeling so much. But it was definitely a better life.
So, I mean, we're talking about science experiments, right? But if science experiments are dependent on feedback loops, right?
Yes.
In fact, I would actually argue that the whole of life is dependent on feedback loops. But were you getting the signal that actually controlled drinking was a disaster for you, or were you ignoring that signal?
I was getting a signal. I was driving in blackouts, so that scared the shit
Yeah.
out of me. I was not doing well in school, and school was a huge marker for me. Um,
Hmm.
I was, like I said, dating men again only when I was drinking, so that was a marker. And I ended up, this was the hugest marker. Oh, I was mortified. So at that time, then I had a job at a rehab. Someone came to me and said, "Oh, I heard you went through a rehab, and we're opening Allison Rehab, and we don't really know anyone who's sober that's your age. Would you be willing to work for us?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah." But at that time, I was maybe like not even sober yet, but then I was sober. So they threw me this huge 3-year surprise party. And I only at that time, then, because I'd gone back to AA, I only had 9 months sober. So I told the
Right.
director, I fully expected to get fired, and they didn't fire me. But that was okay. So let's just cut it, Laura. Yeah.
Right.
Love this work
Yeah.
and just, yeah.
Then the second Damascene moment happened. That moment when you knew this is it. I really do have to get back to AI, and this is it. I really do have to stick on my recovery journey and no more controlled drinking. And this is it. What happened in your life that made you think that way?
Well, like I said, the job. Um, and see, at this time, so I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 3 years clean and
Hmm.
sober. But I was starting
Yeah.
to experience some of the bipolar, but I didn't know what it was. And I had in therapy in AA had been like this all throughout my recovery. If it wasn't for therapy, I definitely wouldn't be here either. But my therapist would start asking because I was starting to sink into despair, and I'm like, this is, and now I'm sober, and what's happening? It was really scary. Um, So I knew drinking wouldn't help that. And I knew what had happened in the past, and I just thought, no, this time, I just got to definitely stay sober. I don't want to risk that again. And, but I was really like in recovery, I saw a lot of people, their lives seemed to do this trajectory, and mine went this way. And I could
Yeah.
not, for the life of me, figure it out. I was going to all these meetings and sponsoring and recovery, and my therapist is like, "Well, you have a mood disorder. You have, you're depressed." But she goes, "I think it's something more." And then she started asking me each week if I was suicidal, but I was lying. I was suicidal, but I didn't want to tell her because then I thought I'm going to end up in a psych ward again. But now I'm an adult, and I don't know. I don't think that's going to be such a good place for me. So I lied to her for months, and I was just
All
like
right.
holding my fingernails. And then I called my sponsor like 3 in the morning. I said, I'm not going to make it. And she came and got me. And she brought me to a rehab. And then they did a bunch of testing and they said, you have manic depression, which now is called bipolar disorder. And you need to go on lithium. And at that time in AA was not a big believer in medication. And
Mm.
so the AA groups I belonged to, except for one, a women's group, the rest are like, no, you're not. If you take that lithium, you're not sober. So I told them I'm not taking it. And then the women's AA group, I kind of consider them family. They actually came to family group. They're very sweet because now I'm an adult and, well, we know my family story. So um, they got me a T-shirt that said "winner," and I forgot about that. Like, there's a saying in AA, "Stick with the winners," but I felt like such a
Yeah.
loser. I'm going to be 3 years sober in rehab, but it was the bipolar disorder, and so I finally agreed to take the lithium.
And did they allow you to join their group whilst being on
Oh,
lithium?
I was actually part of the group before I went in.
Right.
So, yeah,
So they didn't reject you because of your use of medication,
no, they didn't.
but other groups within
Other
the
group,
AA organization did. I find that very difficult to accept. I mean,
yeah,
lithium's not
you gotta
a, you don't
understand
get
it.
high on lithium. It's a
Yeah.
life-saving drug.
I mean, this is, 50 years ago. You gotta, you know, have to put the context in there too.
Mm.
But, or 47 years, but it was longer than that. But yeah, and that really changed my life more than AA. I was like, oh my God, is this what living is? I've just
Mm.
been surviving, even sober. I was not having the two cars in the garage and happily ever after. I was
Yeah.
struggling every single day, and I could not figure out why. But, you know, I just kept going to meetings. Thank God I didn't drink. But yeah, lithium was like this magic elixir. And
Mm.
I
So,
was like, wow, this is a missing piece.
so not only were you struggling with not belonging and not being cared for by your family, you were also struggling with your sexual identity, and you must have been struggling with at least the prodrome of bipolar disorder when you were a teenager. And you had so three things that were really, they were really setting you off course. Not just one, but three things. And yet you won. You are a winner, Laura. I can't put it any other way. You've managed to get through that, where lesser mortals would perhaps have failed.
Thank you. That
Yeah.
means a lot to me.
But it's
I,
so true.
I am lucky. I do feel very grateful because I really didn't
Yeah.
think I'd make it this far at all.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad I have.
So I think you need to be congratulated, or the 20 to 25-year-old Laura needs to be congratulated, because without her, we wouldn't have the Laura Petrocek today that we know and love.
Oh, thanks. Nicole.
So after that diagnosis was made, and after you were started on lithium, did your life, and you continued in your journey of sobriety, did your life take a turn for the better?
My life took a huge turn for the better. And so much so, whereas I had accepted my alcohol use disorder, after a year and a half on lithium, I decided I did not need lithium anymore.
Mm.
And it wasn't a huge change initially, but it made my recovery just 10 times harder. And then, I had therapists who, it wasn't until 10 years ago, a therapist I was, he asked me, "What mood stabilizer are you on?" And I said, "What's today? Thursday?" Or no, he said, "How long since you've been on a mood stabilizer?" And I was like, "Okay, was it Thursday?" I said, "About 30 years." And he was like, "What?" And it made my life so much harder. They prescribed antidepressants, which helped a little, but then it also triggered that manic, not manic,
Mm. Yeah,
hypomanic.
manic. Oh,
Yeah,
hypomanic. Right.
yeah, and part of it was I realized is that I still suffered from depression, and so not being on the lithium, it got me to feel a little happy once in a while when I was hypomanic. Although the consequences were got worse and worse, and by the time I was, had my daughter and raising my daughter and in my relationship, I'd go to meetings and I'd be like, oh my God, I sound like one of them, but I'm still cold sober. What is going on? And it was
Mm.
being the symptoms of bipolar, but not being properly medicated, meaning I was extremely irritable,
Mm.
angry, and, my moods were like this. My partner didn't know who she was coming home to. And that's like I'd hear at the meetings. Oh, my partner, husband, wife didn't know who they were coming home to when that person was drinking. And I said, oh my God, I sound just like a regular alcoholic, but I'm not drinking. And
Mm.
finally, when I got back on a mood stabilizer, I was like, and I had a huge amends and continued to for a while, not just to my partner, but to my daughter. Because, the one thing I really wanted was to make her life like a total 360 from mine growing up. And
Yeah.
I feel like I failed her. And, I mean, we're definitely very close now, but things were not, we weren't close for a few years. And after I got back on lithium and then making my amends and talking to her about bipolar disorder, because I've talked to her about addiction. She knows in recovery and depression, but not bipolar. And she
Yeah.
really didn't know about it because she was so angry with me about how I was, that I was just not the nicest person at times.
Yeah.
So that's been another big part of my recovery is the mental illness. When my daughter left for college, I really went into a deep depression, and my psychiatrist recommended transcranial magnetic stimulation. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you've heard of it, TMS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, totally contraindicated if you have bipolar disorder. So
Mm.
about 12 treatments in, my partner and I are out in Virginia visiting my daughter for a tournament, and I went into a full-blown manic attack. It was horrific. I was scared. The whole thing was a nightmare. And, it took me, and that's where the book came out of my book, because I ended up in a year-long DBT program because I was so dysregulated. Even the medication wasn't making much of a dent. And so whenever I hear anyone mention TMS, I say, no, no. But
Yeah.
again, I have bipolar disorder. I guess if you have quote
Mm.
unquote regular depression, it helps. But that was a huge mistake on their part. And yeah, that was like worse than when I was 17 and worse than I was 19, you know, and then worse when I was 21 when I first was diagnosed.
So where you are now, you are a successful practicing psychologist. You are a successful author with a book that you would advise others, or that you within which you share your wisdom regarding the combination of AA and dialectical behavioral therapy. And that's a in terms of retrospectives, that's a huge win, isn't it? That's a long term success.
it is a long-term success. And of course, life happens when you're clean and sober, just like
Yeah, it
you
does.
weren't. And, several months ago, a huge loss of my partner dying. And
Yeah,
so I'm still reeling from that. I mean, today, I know we'd be celebrating together. So, uh, so it's a reminder, almost more so, of her death than of my recovery. But you know, um, I know she'd want me to celebrate, so I'm going out with my daughter and a couple of friends tonight. I wasn't going
hmm.
to, and my daughter was like, "Mom, you gotta." I
You have
said, she
to.
goes, "What are you doing to celebrate?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be on the podcast and be interviewed." She goes, "Well, you got to do more than that."
What, you mean there's more to life than us on a podcast?
She goes, "That doesn't sound like."
Well,
So,
I'm almost tempted to be offended by that.
well, okay, if she's a whatever millennial, Gen Z, who knows, whatever.
All right.
She's a young person, and their idea of celebrating is different. So,
Yeah. So, what we've almost run out of time, but I just wanted you to ask you this question: what message of hope would you give to someone struggling with mental health issues, struggling with their sexual identity, struggling with not feeling as if they're belonging, struggling with a substance? What would you say to them?
I would say keep going. One day at a time. If depending on which of those issues you mentioned, if it's substance use, reach out to a therapist in that, or a meeting that could help you there. If you're struggling with your sexual identity, you could go to a LGBTQ community center, or type of center that could help you. If you're suffering with a mental illness, reach out to a therapist, or again, a community type clinic. But I remember this one saying, if you're going through hell, keep going. Just keep one foot in front of the other. And so many times I would just tell myself, or in AA, they have this saying, what's the next right thing? And even if I was crying or upset or whatever was going on, some would say, what's the next right thing? Well, I was going to go swimming. Well, then you're going to go swimming. Or what's the next right thing? Well, I have X, Y, or Z to do. Then that's what you're doing. Not to get
Hmm.
stuck, not to look
Yeah,
at where your feet are, not to
yeah,
just keep moving, and go to the people that could give you help in those particular areas. So reach out. Now, I mean, I think people are lucky. At the time I went to go see a psychiatrist, I hid in the bottom of the back seat because I was so ashamed. But now mental health is being talked about, and same with
yeah.
substance use. So there's a lot of people out there that you haven't met yet, that care about you, that love you, and that want to see you make it.
Laura, I think we're running out of time, but I want to thank you for your bravery, your honesty, and also your courage, because I think you can inspire so many other people. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time.
Thank you so much, Virgil, for having me.
That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.